These promises strong as a spell, I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you.
Hi guys, welcome back to exmolex. Today I want to talk to you guys about the influence continuum from the BITE model. If you guys have been around my channel for a while, you have probably heard me talk about the BITE model quite a few times. I personally have found the BITE model to be a really great way to be able to differentiate whether or not a group is a destructive cult. BITE stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And I've made several videos where I've compared Mormonism to different points on the BITE model. Mormonism is the group that I grew up in, and so it's been very interesting to me to apply the BITE model to Mormonism just to see where does it match up and where does it not. Now, the influence continuum isn't the same as other points on the BITE model, like do they control what you wear? Do they control what you eat? Do they control your sexuality? Things like that. Now, you can let me know in the comments if you think that I'm correct or incorrect on where I would place Mormonism on each of these things. But for background information, I grew up in the Mormon church. I was a member until I was 25. I was very invested in it. And my whole family, 7 generations back, are members of the church. And you know, obviously, when I grew up in the church, I had a lot of interactions with Mormons, and I was one myself. And now, having left the church and making content about it online, I've had a lot of interactions with Mormons in the digital sphere as well. And obviously not all of those interactions have been positive. I would say being on like this side of the fence about it, and being able to talk to Mormons not face to face, just, you know, anonymous commenters, I get to see a lot more of the angry side of Mormonism than I did when I was a member of the church. But I feel like it's given me like more perspective. I've been able to speak to more people. I've been able to see Mormonism for more than just this happy family-centered group that I grew up in. When I was a kid in the church, Mormonism could do no wrong. It was the one true church on the face of the earth. Everybody was happy and everybody belonged. So seeing it from the outside and being critical of it and seeing how people react to that criticism, I feel like has given me kind of a unique view on the whole thing. So anyway, let's go over this together. You let me know what you think in the comments. So there's the constructive and healthy side and the destructive and unhealthy side. For individuals, the constructive and healthy side, authentic self, and then destructive and unhealthy, false cult identity. So does Mormonism, for individuals, lean more authentic self or lean more false cult identity? So growing up in the church as a member, I would have said that I was my authentic self in the church. And I don't think that I necessarily would have been lying. I just didn't know any better. Here's the thing. Looking at Mormons from the outside, it's pretty easy, I would say at least to like 85% of the time, to tell who is an active practicing Mormon. There are just certain things about Mormons that make them more obviously Mormon. Like, for example, I live in Idaho, not necessarily a super Mormon area of Idaho, but like they're around. I would say like maybe a quarter, maybe less. Maybe like a fifth of my neighborhood is Mormon. When we moved in, I saw a neighbor coming from down the street to welcome us to the neighborhood, and he was so overwhelmingly Mormon looking, I knew immediately that he and his family were members of the church. And I was right. I'm not even sure how exactly to explain that, but it's just very obvious. And I would say that even Mormons would agree with me on this, because when I was a member of the church, we were taught that we were a peculiar people. And we would often hear stories in church about how we stood out as a peculiar people. Often people recognize Mormons as Mormons. And I never thought of that as a negative thing as a member, but it's true. Like, usually you can tell by looking at somebody that they're Mormon, if you're familiar with Mormonism. There's also a lot of things within Mormonism that they aspire to be, traits that they aspire to have, things that they aspire not to do, that kind of end up putting them into this box. So I would say this definitely leans toward the unhealthy side of being a false cult identity. Unconditional love or conditional love. Again, as a Mormon, I would have definitely been like unconditional love all the way. Not really. I would say true unconditional love would be, it doesn't matter what religion anybody is. We're not going to treat them any differently. I'm not going to go door to door and try to convince people that their deeply held beliefs are incorrect and they need to join my one specific little religion that is like, you know, 0.2% of the world's population because this is the only correct one. A lot of Mormons abide by the hate the sin, not the sinner thing, that really just comes across very patronizing, like, well, you know, I hate that you drink alcohol and I hate that you have piercings and I hate that you are gay, but I love you. It doesn't feel that way, right? I would definitely say that this is towards the conditional love side. Compassion versus hate. This is a little bit tricky because I feel like in general, the church's teachings try to teach compassion, but there's also things that the church has done, said, and taught in its past, and sometimes still continues to teach today, that while maybe the intention was to be compassionate and loving, it comes across very hateful. And you'll see that in like the misogyny and homophobia and racism that has been so sadly interwoven into Mormonism's history and doctrine. And they have definitely tried to pull away from that and change that and not be that way anymore and sort of keep up with the world today, but it's still there, and it's kind of pernicious. And I see that within, you know, some people in my own family who I love very much, but they've grown up, especially the older generation has grown up with this certain way of thinking that still is there today. And Mormons, you know, they're definitely taught to love one another as Jesus loves you and all these things. But one of the things that I think of is that like there's so much in Mormonism that is less about what you should do and more about what you can't or shouldn't do. And it starts to sort of outshine the like, be kind, be good, be charitable, be loving, and just like, don't. And a lot more people end up being judgmental about people that do those things that you're not supposed to do. There's certainly so many members of the church that are compassionate, but it has layers of both. I'll just say that. Creativity and humor versus solemnity, fear, and guilt. I think that Mormonism has creativity. You know, growing up in the church, we did a lot in the youth programs encouraging creativity, but the fear and the guilt were definitely interlaced into my experience growing up in the church. I was constantly afraid of not being worthy, constantly afraid that I wouldn't make it to the highest level of heaven and be with my family forever, because that was only guaranteed to the people who made it to the very tippy top. And you have to be like Jesus, who was perfect, to get there. And so I had a lot of fear about that. I had a lot of guilt for every sin that I committed. And so I would say for individuals and for myself personally, it definitely leaned more towards the fear and the guilt. Free will and critical thinking versus dependency and obedience. This one for Mormonism particularly leans so far towards the destructive and unhealthy side that it's not even funny. Mormonism revolves around obedience to what the prophets say, because the prophets speak for God. So when a prophet proclaims something over the pulpit, that is God speaking directly to the people. And they over and over and over throughout the entire course of Mormonism's history have preached obedience, obedience, obedience. That is the most important thing. Okay, now let's take a look at the for leaders part. Psychologically healthy versus narcissistic and psychopathic. Let's just start at the very beginning with like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Were these psychologically healthy men or narcissistic / psychopathic men? A lot of narcissists are extremely charismatic, and I think that Joseph Smith was a charismatic person, and it's one of the reasons that he had so many people agree to follow him. And I think that we can also safely say that a lot of cult leaders are very charismatic, and that's why a lot of people end up following them, even if they have strange, scary, or dangerous ideas. These modern day individuals that are leading the church, are they psychologically healthy? I don't know. I can't say that for sure. Was Joseph Smith, the man who started the Mormon church, a narcissist? I believe that yes, he was. Next up is knows own limits versus elitist / grandiose. Joseph Smith definitely was very grandiose in his ideas, but I would say that also applies to current leaders of the church in some ways, because they believe that they are God's mouthpiece on the earth. You, one person out of billions, are the only person that's able to speak for the Lord in all things, like the God. And everybody needs to listen to what you say in order for them to make it to heaven. I would label that as pretty elitist / grandiose. Empowers individuals versus power hungry. I think that the church itself and the people in the church would argue that because you know, just random people are able to reach positions of power in the church, mostly men, of course. Like, women don't have a whole lot of power in the church, but men are able to become bishops, are able to become stake presidents and apostles, and possibly the prophet. But we've also seen throughout the years that most people who are making it to the very tippity top are related to each other. That started out at the very beginning. Like, Joseph Smith was giving leadership positions to a lot of his family members. Actually, let me just look this up for you real quick in case you weren't aware. So Elder Ballard, who is an apostle, is a great grandson of Joseph F. Smith, who was a prophet. Henry B. Eyring, a current apostle, is the nephew of Spencer W. Kimball, who was the prophet. Prophet Joseph Fielding Smith was the son of a former prophet, Joseph F. Smith, and the great nephew of the original Joseph Smith Jr. And from what I've seen as well, a lot of the people who are in the Quorum of the 12 are related in some way to one another, or former apostles and prophets of the LDS Church. So, like, as you can see, a lot of nepotism. So I would say, like, for leadership, empowering individuals versus being power hungry, if the majority of the leadership at the very tippity top is only going to those who are related to former leaders in some way, that seems pretty power hungry to me, and not so much empowering individuals. Next up is trustworthy versus secretive and deceptive. I could write a novel about this. I feel like the church kept a lot of secrets from me. I feel like it lied to me about a lot of things. I feel like I didn't have informed consent on so many things. The church historically has been extremely secretive about what goes on inside the temple, even to the point of people having to swear to if they told the secrets of the temple. I wouldn't say that they're trustworthy at all, considering how many things they've whitewashed or left out of the history, or not talked about, or just kept from people in general. So yeah, very deceptive, secretive leadership. And then accountable versus claims absolute authority. Dallin H. Oaks, who is an apostle, has said that the church does not give apologies, and they do claim absolute authority, like so much so to the point where the prophet is the only man on earth who speaks for God and everything. Yes, like, it is giving narcissism, it's giving grandiose, it's giving absolute authority. Okay, now we'll move on to for the organization. Okay, so first up, egalitarianism versus elitism. So if you're not familiar, I will just put it up on the screen for you really quick. Egalitarianism is the doctrine that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. Obviously, the church is so very far from this, and I think that Mormons probably would argue with me on that point, but I feel like it's not even close. First of all people being equal and deserving equal rights and opportunities, women in the church do not get anywhere near the same rights and opportunities as the men. Like I said before, there's like so many leadership positions for men and so very few for women. A woman in the church could never be an apostle. A woman in the church could never be a prophet. She could never even pass the sacrament, which is what 12-year-old boys do in the church. So right off the bat, we have that. There's also the fact that, you know, they also believe that gay people should not be allowed to get married or even like be in a relationship at all, like not even hold hands or kiss or anything like that. So they can't go to the temple. They can't receive the same blessings of the temple that anybody else in the church that is straight would be able to get. They taught for a long time, decades, that black people did not have the same blessings that white people did. They were not allowed to hold the priesthood. They were not allowed to enter the temple. They weren't allowed to be sealed as families. And this was all the way up until the 60s. So anyway, yeah, we are all the way over to elitism. Checks and balances versus authoritarian structure. I would say that this is all the way over to authoritarian structure because the leadership in the church is not elected. They are called by God, but nobody, you know, the lay people of the church can't be like, let's elect a prophet. That's not how it works. Informed consent versus deceptive / manipulative. I feel like we went into this with the last one, but absolutely there's not informed consent. That's one of the things that bothers me so much about the church and bothers me about my time in the church. And especially when people try to claim that, like, you know, I should have known this stuff all along. You're right, I should have. The church in my time being a member should have taught me so many things that it never did. And it's not like I didn't pay attention. I was that kid in church throughout most of my time. You know, as a teenager, I'm sure I went through some of these where I was like, I'm a rebel, like I'm not gonna do. But like for the most part, especially as a child, my time in the church, I was that kid that was like listening during class, that was putting my hand up in the air like Hermione in Harry Potter. I was the one that was always there. I went to every activity from the time I was a little kid. I graduated seminary. I, was active. Like I was so into this. And the church, there's so much about the church that it never taught me. It taught me the same stuff over and over and over and over. I read the scriptures over and over and over, but there were things that never came up somehow in all of those years of church education. So many things that were kept from me. So yeah, this one for me is absolutely super far on the deceptive and manipulative side. So next up is individuality/diversity versus clones people. Again, I feel like we talked in this in the for individuals section where we said authentic self versus false/cult identity. The whole like we are a peculiar people thing. And the standards that they have that every Mormon is supposed to follow, like you become a group that is obviously identifiable as part of that group. And next up, means create end versus ends justify means. I would say definitely ends justify means. The first thing that popped into my head was conversion therapy. Literally shocking people into not being gay, which is horrible, but apparently that's preferable to them being gay. I don't know why that's the first thing that popped into my head, but encourages growth versus preserves own power. Encourages growth, I would say like somewhat the church does encourage growth. Like for me personally, growing up in the church, participating in like the young women's program and things like that, there were things that you were supposed to be working for and attaining and like, personal progress. That was the whole name of the thing, is making personal progress. And some of the things were really good, like individual worth. That's a great thing to strive towards. But then on the other side, preserves own power. The church is all about preserving its own power, about growing its wealth. And again, like I've said, the church encouraged growth for me as a young woman up to a certain point. Obviously, I couldn't continue growing beyond being a wife and a mother. I couldn't be in a position of leadership in the church over men. The only power that you can hope to attain in the church as a woman is over other women and children. That in itself, the fact that women cannot attain power, is just the men in the church preserving their own power. And then free to leave versus no legitimate reasons to leave. Absolutely no legitimate reasons to leave. And this is just over and over. You're taught this from a very young age. There is no legitimate reason to leave the church, and people who do leave are, led astray or stupid, or they didn't have enough faith, etc., etc., etc. So I would say that the church is definitely falling onto the unhealthy side of the spectrum. But of course, that's just my opinion as one person who is a former Mormon. So if you are a current member of the church, if you're a former member of the church, let me know. What do you think? Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? But please be respectful. I don't like it when people are mean to me. Also, if you are a member or a former member of another religion, like where do you see your group falling on this spectrum? I'm very curious to hear. Thank you guys so much for watching. Special thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. You guys are the best. And extra special thank you to Amy and Doug Davis for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. Thank you guys so much. If you would like to support the channel, there are links to do so in the description below, as well as links to all my other social media if you would like to see more content. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Keeping these promises strong as a spell, I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you, that's for sure.